One of my favorite holidays just passed. February 15th. Yep, you heard me right. February 15th, not the 14th. Oh, I love Valentine's Day, but I'm more in love with the discounted candy the day after, including a candy that apparently I'm in the minority when it comes to liking. But this year, they were harder to come by, despite being the most popular Valentine's Day candy. The history of any modern-day candy actually can be attributed to these as well. You're listening to The Story Behind, the extraordinary history of the ordinary. I'm your host, Emily Prokop, and this is the story behind Conversation Hearts. But first, a quick message. Did you know Emily Prokop wasn't always my name? It's my married name. And since taking the name a few years back, I've heard all sorts of mispronunciations and misspellings my husband never warned me about before getting married. Spellcheck likes to suggest pork chop as my last name. But luckily, when you search Amazon for The Story Behind by Emily Porkchop, my book still comes up, which helps out a lot since there are a lot of other books called The Story Behind, believe it or not. Go ahead, try searching The Story Behind by Emily Porkchop. And while you're there, I'd love it if you left a review if you enjoyed the book. Me and the rest of the Porkchop family, thank you so much. Before we start, I should mention that I'll be using the words Conversation Hearts and Sweethearts interchangeably. Sweethearts is the brand name for the candy hearts from the New England Confectionery Company, also known as Necco. Conversation Hearts is the generic term, although Brock's Candy Company calls their version Tiny Conversation Hearts. But since the originals were made by Necco, that's the storyline we'll be following for this episode. When a pharmacist named Oliver Chase came to Boston from England in the mid-1800s, he found himself in a great business to be in, since lozenges were all the rage at the time. Pharmacists could mix dough, flavoring, and medicine and cut it into easy-to-digest lozenges for customers. But at the time, they had to do this by hand with mortars and pestles. Chase, eager to get on the apothecary lozenge bandwagon and the Industrial Revolution bandwagon, created a lozenge-making machine in 1847. He fashioned one similar to a pasta-making machine where he could put dough in one end, and as he turned the crank, a roller would cut dozens of lozenges quickly. He revised his machine and finally patented it 10 years later. Soon he was making the lozenges without medicine, and the candies became a favorite, and became known as hub wafers at the time. These became the Necco wafers we're familiar with today. These have their own story that involves supposedly being carried by Union soldiers during the Civil War, and an aggressive advertising campaign in the early 1900s that included assuring parents that candy was healthy for kids. But that's a story for another day. Oliver Chase found success with his wafer-making machine, and other candy companies soon followed in his footsteps. But it was Chase's brother Daniel who decided to use vegetable dye to write little messages on the wafers. At the time, there was another candy in the shape of a shell that held a slip of paper with a saying printed on it inside, similar to a fortune cookie. These were called cockles and inspired Daniel. Since the lozenges were large, they were able to print long sayings popular in the Victorian era, like, "Please send a lock of your hair by return mail," or "Married in white, you have chosen right." Soon the company, which was later known as the New England Confectionery Company, were making wafers in all sorts of different shapes. By 1866, the brothers had invented a machine for printing the messages too. The heart-shaped candy known as Sweethearts became a Valentine's favorite for years to come, and other shapes like baseballs and horseshoes fell out of favor. But most likely they had to shift their focus simply to the hearts, since the company had to start making the conversation hearts for the next year's Valentine's Day about 11 months in advance. Back in 2003, I opened a box of conversation hearts that looked like any other box, but I got a conversation heart that said, Book Club. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why that would be written on a conversation heart, and I was convinced it was a misprint. For months, I actually had it taped to the wall of the ice cream place I worked at so coworkers could also see what I considered to be a complete anomaly. It wasn't until doing the research for this episode that I found out that from 1997 to 2009, Necco had themes for their conversation hearts every year. The theme for 2003, when I found the book club heart, was love lessons and included other phrases like class act, whiz kid, and let's read. The theme seemed to stop in 2009, and for the next year's batch, Necco decided to change the original recipe. They switched from artificial flavors and colors to natural flavors and colors, giving them a different taste and look. But people didn't like the change. By the next year, they saw sales fall 35%, and they changed back to artificial flavors and dyes, except for the white heart. That was already all natural to begin with. However, this year, there were no conversation hearts. In July of 2018, Necco went out of business. Necco was bought by Round Hill Investments, but Necco wafers and sweethearts were then sold to Sprangler Candy Company, best known for making Dum Dum lollipops. Since Sprangler acquired the company in September, there wasn't enough time to produce enough conversation hearts before this Valentine's Day season. But not to worry, Sprangler has said that by 2020, sweethearts will be back on the shelves as usual. Information for this episode was sourced from Smithsonian, Mental Floss, Reader's Digest, and more links, which can be found in the show notes at thestorybehindpodcast.com. This week on Trivia Tuesday in the Story Behind discussion group on Facebook, Adam posted a picture from Fact Weird that said when ships pass through Point Nemo in the southern Pacific Ocean, they are 2,700 kilometers from the nearest land. That means that at the right time of day, the nearest humans are on the International Space Station, 416 kilometers up. Jen posted she fell into a wiki hole about Josephine Baker. She adopted 12 kids, that's Josephine, not Jen, from all kinds of different backgrounds and raised them with different religions because she wanted to prove that diverse children could still be siblings. Glenn posted when they were developing the telegraph, one of the suggested approaches involved a separate wire for each letter of the alphabet, attached to a person who would receive a shock and then shout the assigned letter. If you'd like to talk about trivia you pick up during the week and have it read on the show, join the Story Behind discussion group on Facebook. This episode was brought to you by the Story Behind executive producers, who support the show through the Patreon page at patreon.com/thestorybehind, and who get access to the full scripts of these episodes before they even go live, and a bonus episode every month. The full list of executive producers can be found at thestorybehindpodcast.com/executive producers. Thanks for listening. Since lozenges, I can't say lozenges. Chase, eager to get on the apothecary lozenge so close. Chase, eager to get on the apothecary lozenge bandwagon and the Industrial Revolution bandwagon. I was so close. And the Industrial I have a case of the giggles. It doesn't even sound like a word anymore. Lozenge. A roller would cut dozens of lozenges. Why did I write this? A roller would cut dozens of What is with the giggles? Okay.